everybody, I'm Natalie with Missouri Star Quilt Company, and today on Quilting 101 we're going to talk about how to calculate backing. So once your quilt top is finished, you need to make sure that you have a backing to build your quilt sandwich, which is the top, middle, and back, batting and backing. Your backing just has to be bigger than your quilt top. That's the most important thing. It's got to be bigger because you're going to quilt it, whether you quilt it on your home machine or at a long arm, and you'll need that extra space to make sure that everything is really well secured. Okay, so to figure backing for this table runner, we're going to need to measure it. I'm going to start with the short end, and that is 18 inches. And then this one, I'm going to measure it, fold it in half, because my cutting mat, my measuring surface here, isn't long enough to get the entire measurement. And then I'm just going to double that. So this is 22. So we'll call it 44. So I need a piece of fabric that's larger than 18 by 44. This is the size of my table runner. And typically when you're backing a quilt or a table runner, you want to add at least 4 inches all the way around. So you'll have 2 inches on all sides, all 4 sides. So I'm going to look for a piece of fabric that is 22 by 48. When you're trying to figure out what fabric you can use for your backing, you've got to consider the size of the fabric that you're working with. Most of our typical quilters cottons are great for backing quilts as well as piecing in the front. You can do either, but they are 40 to 45 inches wide. So I know that I can't use the width to cover the length of my table runner because my table runner is 48. And even if I have a 45-inch wide piece of fabric, it's not going to be long enough. I'm still going to need to add 4 or 5 inches to that. And every time you add a seam, don't forget that you lose a ½ inch. So add that in when you're piecing. Make sure that you remember that you lose a ½ inch per seam. So if I don't want a seam in the back of my quilt, I'm going to want to cut lengthwise. And in yardage, that means that I'm going to have a 36-inch per yard. So I'll need at least 1.5 yards, or 1.33 yards technically. It depends. So for purchasing, it just depends what your quilt shop sells. Some do quarters, some do whole yards only, ½ yards, whatever it is. But for this quilt, I would probably pick up 1.5 yards of fabric, and that means that my backing now measures 44, 45, the width of fabric, by like 52 inches long. So I know I'm not going to need all of that fabric, but it gives me plenty to work with, and I would just make my quilt sandwich. And then if you're quilting it on your home machine, I would probably go ahead and trim off the excess because you don't want to have that bulk in your machine when you're fiddling around with it. But if you're sending your quilt off to a long armor, you probably want to make sure that you have 8 extra inches all the way around because they need the room to pin the quilt onto the leaders of the machine, top and bottom, and then they need the room on the sides for things like clamps and testing tension. So that is why they need so much extra at a long armor as opposed to when you're quilting at home. When you're quilting at home, you don't want the extra bulk and you can really move it around and make it fit. But when you're on a long arm and everything is stretched and loaded onto all the rollers, you just have to have some extra room so that as things, as they shift and shrink, you'll have enough room and you won't run out of backing before you run out of quilt top at the end of the quilt. That's rough. I hope this has been helpful in giving you some information on how to calculate your backing. We also have a printable that we've put together that you guys can download and print off and keep in your sewing room. Keep it handy for measuring and calculating and little reminders next time you are backing your quilt. I hope this has been helpful. Have a great day.